Welcome, Sharon, to Philippa Squared, Parenting by Design. It is such a privilege and an honour to have you with us. You and I go back a long way, but Pippa, you're just getting to see the beauty that is Sharon Moloney. So I'd really want to, we're going to have a conversation today. It's just going to flow because we have so many areas of interest that overlap. And so I welcome you. Would you introduce you? I know people will have listened to the bio at the beginning, but would you introduce yourself, please, and just tell us from your words who you are and what you're passionate about?
Beautiful. Thank you, Philippa, and for such a warm, welcome. So, how I describe who I am and what I do is really centered around my purpose or my mission or my deepest heart's desire or my evolutionary impulse, all of which is the same thing. And that is to restore the sacredness of the female body to the planet. I know that's what I'm here to do. And so I've been working in different aspects of that journey pretty much my whole adult life, but more in a more focused way for the last 30 years. And I hadn't joined the dots with all of those things, but I had been like doing this piece of training and this piece of training, and then my master's in women's studies, and then my PhD, which I remember you coming to my exit seminar at the uni when I presented my findings to the uni about the female biology is sacred. Then I went on and became a pregnancy counsellor, a childbirth educator, a hypnobirthing practitioner. Now I'm a hypnotherapist and educator around women's health. And then a couple of years ago, I did some training with futurist Barbara Marx Hubbard, and she got us to do our evolutionary biography. And when I went back and looked through the years at all of those different choice points, I saw that what connected them all was my experience of and my desire to restore the sacredness of the female body to the planet. So it was like looking back with the benefit of hindsight and going, oh, that theme just kept unfolding and unfolding and unfolding because it's what I'm here to do. So that's what my book is about. It's what I embody. It's how I walk my talk in the world is to communicate that message and to remind women that whether we have children or not, we are life bearers in our menstruating and in our birthing and in our blood mysteries, in our menopause, and whether we have children or not, that has great significance, and it defines how we are in life, what we bring to the table as women. So that's a long answer to who I am, but that's a start.
I love that, Sharon, and you do it so beautifully.
Thank you.
Yeah. Pippa, feel free to jump in with questions or anything to as we go.
Yeah, there's one thing, Sharon, that I would love to for you to unpack a bit, if that's okay, is you were talking about the patterns. Where do you think those patterns arrive from?
I think myself, that I came in with that pattern. I think it was part of the soul.
Patterns, not your passion for it, because I can see that it's awesome. But you were talking about the patterns.
Yeah, I think I came in with those patterns. I think I came in with that interest that kept coming back again and again and again.
Yeah.
So I think it was part of my soul's contract. My purpose in this lifetime was to unravel or to resolve whatever paradoxes I'm able to do in this lifetime around this domain. So I think I probably chose it before I arrived in physical form. That's, like my way of understanding the biggest picture of that. But it's definitely not random. There's a purposeful, meaningful order to those things, as far as I can see.
Yeah.
Did you have any other questions around that, Pippa?
No, go on, Philippa.
I think I totally resonate with that, Sharon. Having been in and out of this work in different facets over the last, and it's only been 20 years for me, but coming in and out and really coming back to soul's purpose and coming back to what makes my heart sing. It's all
Exactly.
around that desire to see women take up their own autonomy, that take up their own power, and sit in their feminine and really be okay in that feminine space, but not just okay, but thriving, and really nurturing that creativity that comes with all aspects of femininity, and the just really sitting in that space. I was coaching a woman recently and she said, I know I need to surrender to my feminine. And I said to her, I don't think you do. I think men surrender to the feminine. Women take it up.
Mm.
Women put it on and they bear it and they become it and they wield it in all its beauty and strength, but they don't surrender to it. Men do.
No, no.
because it
Well,
is so different for them.
yes, and my book is called Activate Your Female Power.
Mm,
So it's my belief that it's there already. It's there, that incredible power that we have as a life bearer. Like you think of a mother bear, somebody tries to harm her cubs, she's going to rip their throat out.
mm,
There's nothing meek or mild about female power. It's super passionate and
mm,
and and designed to foster and enable life to thrive. And we have forgotten that. The ancients knew about it, and indigenous cultures have known about that, since forever. But in our Western culture, we have forgotten about our endogenous, indigenous female power, and we just need to remember it in order for it to be activated and then start embodying it and living it, because it's there. It's already there. It's written into our beings through being female.
absolutely. Let's talk about trauma. Let's talk about birth trauma because you've done a lot of work in this space, and you and I have a huge affinity here in terms of um, the prevention and the healing of birth trauma. And I have my own ideas, but I would love to unpack with you the idea of, for me, I don't feel like birth trauma is something that happens in isolation. I feel like birth trauma is part of a continuum. So I really want to hear your thoughts on how that goes, for most women, and what can happen for a woman over her lifetime, around that space of birth trauma.
Yes, such a good topic and conversation, and it's such a big area of passion for me and one of my main branches of the work that I do. So what comes to mind is there's a First Nations saying, at monarchy a girl enters her power. During her mothering, she practices her power, and her menstruating years, she practices her power, and at menopause, she becomes her power.
Mm,
Right.
Yes.
And
Yes.
even Australian Aboriginal women are revered as being elders when they reach that age, as are many Indigenous cultures. So we have to go back to the beginning. And Philippa, when I was doing my PhD, I don't know if you remember this story, but I started studying in the beginning. My research proposal was looking at the spirituality of birthing. And I remember this day being really frazzled and getting in the car and driving over to the Palmetum and lying on the ground under the trees. And I had like a 20-minute nap. And when I woke up and I looked to the side, and the blades of grass were waving in the wind, and I got this message: to understand spring, you need to understand winter.
mm,
And I knew that it was telling me I needed to investigate menstruation and what happens at menarche in order to understand birth. And so I went back to uni and told my supervisor I needed to include menstruation in my study as well. And she said, well, you realise you'll be doing 2 PhDs. I said, well, be that as it may, that's what I need to do. And so then I started looking back. And when I started looking back, I realised that first blood is where women girls are divested of our female power, because it's pathologised, it's often medicated. there's shame and secrecy and suppression right from the go-get. So then I started reading first-person accounts of particularly the Native American, First Nations American people who had elaborate monarchy ceremonies. And they talked about how your life is changed after that and how you feel as a life bearer and as a representative of the female deity and how empowering that is. Well, somebody in that state is going to move to childbirth very differently than a person who's been completely divested of the sacredness of their bleeding. So these are like some of the bigger picture cultural, they're more than cultural, they're cultural and spiritual traditions that leave us bereft so that we don't have our first initiation into our female power on which to build when it comes time to give birth. And so many women, they know something's missing, but they don't know what. And, you don't know what you don't know when you're having your first child. And unless you've been surrounded by people or you've got somebody, like when I was doing my research, I had a number of women say, oh, I met this woman the night before I went into labour and she told me about her amazing birth and I just modelled it on that. Or somebody had gone to her sister-in-law's birth and seen how she got right into the zone and was able to birth. Those wonderful synchronicities, they're the exception. But if you don't have that exposure, then all you're left with is the medical kind of narrative around birth as this medical emergency that women are destined to malfunction during. And so women are terrified. Well, you have a cervix that's terrified. It's going to stay closed because it doesn't feel safe to open. There's a recipe for birth trauma right there.
Yeah.
And then that mammalian physiology goes into a system that has bright lights and noises and strangers you've never met before and weird procedures that are painful. And then you expect this exquisite, intelligent mammalian organism to do what nature designed. It's not going to happen because the right conditions aren't there.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. It totally disrupts the hormonal symphony of birth, doesn't it?
It's like, and then the greatest tragedy is that so many women think that that's normal birth. They think that's just how birth is, and they leave the system thinking that their body failed them and that their attachment then with their baby is compromised. Often their breastfeeding is difficult. Their confidence to be mothers has been undermined, and they leave it thinking that's just how birth is and that's how hard mothering is. And it's like it's such a sleight of hand that is perpetuated by industrial capitalism because all of these things create money.
Absolutely, like epidurals create
Epidurals,
money.
interventions,
Cesarean sections create money.
all of those things. So women, unless we know, and that's the preciousness of having a podcast like this where we get to talk about these things and name them for what they are. If you don't know that, then you're just kind of trusting that what's around you is normal and how it is. And so we have to look like beneath the sleight of hand that goes on that divests us of our power from the beginning and unpack it and say, no, actually, that's not true. And I'm going to activate my female power.
It's interesting you talk about the idea of being at births and seeing different things. When my only exposure to birth prior to having my first baby was that my mother had babies and she'd had them all in a hospital, and that was my only exposure. When my third daughter was born, I had my eldest two with me, and then when my third was born, I had my other three with me. So they saw birth from very, very young, but it's bigger than that. I remember at that birth, my sister, and you might remember her, but my sister had come to Townsville. She'd had her first baby, and it had been not what she had wanted. And she was in her paradigm came from a nurse's paradigm and an
Right.
emergency paradigm, right? So,
Right.
because that was her particular department, so that was her paradigm. And I remember inviting her to, and she'd been with me for my first birth, which was a cesarean, which was what ended up happening for her first birth. I brought her to my fourth birth. Said, you need to come. You need to see what is actually possible. She
Mm.
came and she was with me for my fourth baby, and she then home birthed her next three
Ah,
babies, because she saw what was possible in that
yes.
space, and
Yes.
that shaped her journey. And then when my eldest daughter went to have her baby, I said to her, okay, you're 6 weeks along, you've decided that this baby is coming into the world. Are we home birthing or are you hospital birthing? What are you doing? And she said, is that even a question? I'm having my baby at home. That's what we do. I was like, and if my pelvic floor had allowed, I would have jumped up and down with joy, because I was so overjoyed that that was her paradigm, that was her
Yes.
story. And so
Yes.
she didn't question that that's what we do in our family, is we
Yes.
birth at home. And so when we do these things and when we involve different generations in our story, we change the paradigm. And I remember her first monarchy. I remember writing a Facebook Messenger message to all of the women in her life about the fact that this had just happened. Please reach out to her and congratulate her and make this a her now being part of something special. And I
Yes.
had pushback from one particular woman. She said, I cannot, she was horrified, appalled, and offended that I would include her in that. And so I just left her out of it. But it really said something about her paradigm in terms of what was shameful and what wasn't.
Yes.
And so we have the opportunity to shape that, and it's such a powerful thing. The
Totally.
I'm speaking, this isn't announced yet, but I'm speaking at the home birth conference this year about how home birth has the capacity to create culture, so to change culture, but to also create community. Um, and it is hugely powerful, this culture that we set up. Um,
Yes.
mm,
It's so helpful for women to see other women birthing at home outside the medical system, but safely and confidently, and the beauty of what can happen, you
mm,
know, in the
Absolutely. And
environment.
also the normalcy of it. Like when you look at
Yes.
the Netherlands, where home birth is
Yes.
really accepted as normal in the Netherlands, like it's a totally different experience for that culture.
Yeah, for sure. For
mm,
sure.
yeah.
So yeah, there's some big themes, cultural, social, spiritual, that interweave to kind of, it's almost like an obstacle course to get back to basics, to what our bodies are naturally capable of doing if they're supported and loved.
Mm,
And I think of the, like, some of the birth trauma stories that I hear. I just my I don't even know how to put words on how I feel when I hear them. I think to myself, if you went to, a lawyer or an accountant or another professional, and that professional started treating you so disrespectfully or so, like, intrusively, you would have no hesitation in getting up and walking out, and being, probably prosecuting them for their whatever their inappropriateness was. But there seems to be this kind of mythology around the medical staff that they can do sometimes really inappropriate and offensive and violating things and not be called to account.
mm,
That's really disturbing. And
yeah.
I'm so heartened to see the work of Hermione Hayes Klein. You would know her, Philippa, doing. She's part of a human rights in childbirth movement that is now naming those things for what they are, so that misbehavior, and it's totally unprofessional, stops, and that people get called to account. Because this moment, somebody's birth, somebody's transition onto the planet, that's how that person is templated for life. They get an imprint when they come in, And then if they're imprinted with love and connection and the touch, everything around them is caring, that's what they embody forward from that point on. How different would our world be if that was the norm?
Absolutely. Sharon, I want to talk a little bit too about, because I think a lot of this comes into, culturally too, how women are sexualized and those sorts of things. And I've just written, um, contributed to a book that a woman is writing about the fact that previous trauma in life can impact on the birth process and
Totally.
consequently the birth. And that might be anything from childhood trauma
Yes.
through sexual trauma and so on. Like there's a lot of things, but can you talk to that?
Yes, absolutely. How could it not? Like it's the same intimate parts of our body. So, when you think of the statistics of how many women experience childhood sexual abuse, inappropriate sexual touch from either family or close, you know, friendship circles, how can that boundary violation not impact her? Because it's often very secret. There's often threats associated with that. There's often huge amount of emotional trauma and turbulence when it comes out and it's brought out into the open. That's going to imprint so deeply in her psyche because our reproductive organs and sexual organs are our most intimate spaces. So one of the things that we do know about birthing, and this is across the mammal kingdom, mammals need to feel safe to open up and give birth. That's the design of the physiology. And what happens if a deer is startled by a predator? Its cervix is going to shut so that the little baby fawn's not going to get eaten. It's instinctive survival that does that. When the predator's internal and the trauma hasn't been metabolized and processed and made conscious and released, you have a predator inside waiting to eat the baby effectively. And so your body's going to shut because that's what it instinctively needs to do to feel safe. And then that's called failure to progress.
Can I
As
tell
if
you a
she's
story?
failing. And it's like, oh, join the dots. Join
Yeah.
the dots. And it's like it's such a huge domain, that whole domain of sexuality and what happens behind closed doors, and that's not spoken about, and often women themselves won't register. Sometimes they do, but sometimes they won't register how that might impact their birth until they're in labor. And because labor and birthing is this huge opening of the psyche as well as the body and the spirit, all the bats come flying out of the belfry because the hormonal state opens us to those whatever has been repressed. So it's too late to do in labour and you're just going to be in the middle of a horror movie. What needs to happen is that needs to be, first of all, it needs to be stopped and addressed way back. That's a whole other big cultural reform that's needed. And then individual women who've undergone those experiences of abuse need to be able to reinstate their sovereignty and the safety of their own body boundaries and know how to implement that during birth so that they're not going to have vaginal exams if they don't want them, or they're not going to have interventions if they don't want them. That their
Yeah.
bodies are inviolate and that they get to choose what happens.
Absolutely, absolutely. And also it allows them to be able to surrender and open up themselves.
Exactly.
And I'd love your thoughts on the energy within the female uterus. And it corresponds so well with the baseline energies of a human being.
Well, the energies within the womb are like, I understand it as being like the basic matrix of life,
Mm,
and the as above, so below. It's like that's where the seed of of a little fertilized egg gets planted, it's one of the most sacred substances in existence because it has everything inside it to be able to support new life. That's way more than just eggs and flour in a bowl and mix it up and off you go with the cake. It's like it requires a whole suite of exquisite substances and energy, and there's so much that's alive inside our womb that we don't have any conscious awareness of necessarily until we do. But then once we do, it's like, it's a cauldron. It's a cauldron of creativity, and what a powerhouse. Whether we have children or not, that is how I understand to be the womb space.
Yeah, and that is just reverberated through Ayurvedic medicine, through Chinese medicine, through ancient practices. I
Yes.
mean, it's something that Western medicine has totally ignored and turned their back away from.
Well, where does this is one of the things that I found fascinating when I started doing my research, because I started looking at, well, how did we get to this understanding of the body is so flawed? The female body is so flawed. And when I was looking back through the history of medicine itself, not just obstetrics, but the history of medicine and science, it really goes back to that whole Newtonian understanding of the world as this clockwork machine.
Yeah,
It just all fits together and click, 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 and it's all just physical. And then, so the body then is just this physical structure like a car that you can put something in or take something out and it'll tick over. And then that all changed when they discovered electromagnetic fields, because that meant the space between things was alive. There was movement and energy, and it was no longer just what's real is this, the hard sort of 3D reality. It's also the space then became measurable and visible and real. And then we kind of made that shift into the new science. And now that new science, I mean, look at it, it's just going like gangbusters with, like, look what can happen in things like radiology departments, or, like the technology's gone so far into the energy domain now. But back then, it wasn't. So science, what we understand as science in the institutions like medicine and so on, it's got a lot of catching up to do with where the actual cutting edge science is practicing now, because it's all about energy now. And
and that's so interesting, isn't it? How we are so far behind. It's mind-boggling. And then meanwhile, like women are being submitted to all this unnecessary procedures
Mm,
and labeling,
yes,
labeling when you're pregnant, like your baby is too big, or you've had a cesarean section, or you've got gestational diabetes. They're big labels.
they are. They're big
Yeah,
fear-inducing labels.
massive,
I just want to
massive.
speak one more thing about this energy in the womb.
Yeah,
That also relates back to the sexuality, because when women experience deep arousal from their womb and from their cervix, they talk about it as being a portal to the greater. And I think that's its purpose, actually. That's our gift as life bearers. The womb, yes, it houses a child and does this amazing thing of growing and birthing a baby, but it's also the portal and our intimate connection with the greater, however you understand that to be. And I mean, I've had my own personal experiences that I'm sure you have as well. There's something that's not definable energetically with this portal to the universe that we have access to through our wombs. And good luck to science if it can ever quantify or fathom that. It's a mystery.
But potentially there's you know, we come from a culture where all medical research effectively was done on men, right? And then
Yes,
just
that's
that
right.
this assumption that women were just a different gender of the same thing and that
A
everything would
flawed
work the same,
version, a
right?
flawed version of.
Yeah,
Yeah, so they're
yeah.
only just now beginning to do that research on women and seeing how their body responds in such a unique and different way. And that I don't think feminism has helped us in lots of ways because it's
No.
talked about as being equal and the same. And actually we are so different and
Mm.
we are capable of so many things in different ways. And it's all about acknowledging that we all have worth and we are all of value, but that does not make us the same.
No,
We
No.
are
exactly.
so very different in so many ways. I wanted to share a story before, and really, this comes down to, I guess it's just a reiteration of what you were saying, Sharon, about fear in that space and previous experiences impacting on future experiences. I remember supporting a woman who was a recent refugee into Australia, so she didn't have English language. And so most of what she and I did together was through body language. But you know, I was a seasoned doula. She was a third-time mum. Um, uh, you know, this woman had come from a very poor circumstance, and when she was about 6 months pregnant, she was 48 kilos. The dietitian's
Oh,
information or advice to her was to eat a lot of ice cream. That was how they were going to fatten her up through the system. um this was her third baby, so she knew her body. She knew how to you know, she knew how to give birth. She'd given birth in a couple of third world countries, and we journeyed to hospital the first time, and she was pushing on the floor at home, and we were thankfully not very far away from the hospital. So in the car we jumped because, you know, we certainly weren't planning a home birth or a free birth. We jumped in the car, took her to hospital, got upstairs, everything stopped. She was closed, fully closed. I'm like, fuck, how could I have been so wrong about that? Like, she was pushing. Like, you know,
yes.
I've done this a
Fully
few times.
dilated.
I know what's going
Yes.
on, right? So then
Yes.
so took her home again. And her husband had some English. Took her home again, and the next day I get the same call. Go back to her home, and again she gets to the point where she's pushing. Okay, let's go. We get back to hospital. Same thing happens.
Oh, wow.
Nothing. The third time we went in, her husband said to me, "Are they going to rape her here?" And I
Oh,
finally understood. I understood what was going on for her. The adrenaline kicked in as soon as we entered into this big white space full of white people with, you know, unknown people, and she closed. Well, she did that again the third time, but this time I got in one of a woman of her culture, and I dosed her up with cups of tea with like 9 things of sugar in it, like 9 spoons of sugar, like massive, massive energy doses. And we walked and we talked and we just spent time. And I made sure she had, you know, interpreters and all of those things. But we had we she got there. But it was a real moment of me understanding just how powerful our cervix is, and the
I
idea
do.
that when we are not, because you know, I've been with women
Not
who,
safe.
yeah, we're not safe, so we don't open.
Yes.
And we can close that from fully dilated pushing a baby out to
Yes.
not happening
Yes.
anymore, right?
Yes. Yes. And it makes survival sense from a
Yes.
mammalian perspective. It
Mm.
just makes survival sense. It can also be fully dilated, close, and then open.
Yes.
You know, that's the
mhm.
amazing thing.
I had that in 20 minutes. She went from she'd been in labor for 24 hours, went from 2 centimeters. We did 20 minutes worth of imagination and visualization, and 20 minutes later, she was 10 centimeters dilated and pushing her baby out. So,
That's amazing.
like, totally, you know, 80%, said this for years, 80% of giving birth is in our head. It is an
Yes.
unconscious process, and the only thing that'll get in the way is our consciousness and our
Yes.
unconscious scripts and the beliefs that we hold about birth. and
So
about our
true.
body and about whether or not we can trust ourselves. And when
Yes.
things like sexual assault and childhood trauma are not dealt with in a respectful way, and when
Yes.
our story is, well, nobody will do anything about it,
Yeah.
or it's my fault, or
Yes.
whatever it might be, we then take that into our birthing experience, and the same happens again.
Yeah.
And it's our fault.
Yes.
We were
Yes.
flawed.
Yeah, it's a reoccurring pattern.
Mm.
Mm.
It in a nutshell.
Like I
I'm
said,
very heartened to see that we have these terms now, though, like obstetric violence. We're
yes.
beginning to put a label on it that actually takes the onus off of the woman and puts
Yes.
it onto the system where it belongs. Now, sometimes that's not done in a way that is meant to be harsh or meant to be violating, but it doesn't matter. The fact is, it happened and it
Yeah.
created that. It
Yes.
created the perception or the circumstance under which a woman felt disempowered or felt coerced or
That's
whatever.
why it's
Mm.
that's why it's so important to have this understanding of human rights as a framework around this.
Mm.
The human rights of a birthing woman and what needs to be in place for those rights to be respected and cared for. And
Absolutely.
safety's got to be at the top of the list because it's how we function as mammals. No cervix is going to open if you don't feel safe. You
Yeah.
know?
And also the right for autonomy, Sharon. And that's what so many women in today's society don't realise. My doctor wants to induce me. I will be induced. They are forcing
Yes.
me to be induced, but they're not.
Yes. Yes.
You know, they
Yes.
don't
Exactly.
realise I have their rights.
That's right. That's right.
Mm. I don't know about you, Sharon, but I've always said I am not raising nice, good girls. Now that makes them
Oh
difficult.
no.
That makes them difficult to live with in their teen years. But what I'm raising is strong, powerful women who know their own mind, know their own body, and speak their truth.
Yeah,
And
they have to
I'm
be
raising
equipped.
kind women,
Yes.
community-minded women, women who have compassion for others, but they are not nice, good girls.
No. No, no. No. We want it goes back to what you said before about the differences. I think that's really important. I wanted to pick up that thing, the sexual differences. I came across this reading when I was doing my PhD that was talking about in an Indigenous group in WA, and they had the philosophy that the sexes were physically and functionally different but without hierarchy.
Beautiful.
And I thought, that's it in a nutshell. That's it. Physically and functionally different but without hierarchy.
Yeah,
I
because
love
we've
that.
each got our different roles and responsibilities and talents and what we can actually do.
Yeah, and you know,
We complement each other.
in my book, one of the things I say in my, I think it's on the back cover actually, is stop trying to be like the men. Stop trying to be like the men and just be
Yeah.
female, because it's super amazing and powerful in its own right, but different. And it's actually that the mother bear life preserving power that considers all the outliers and all the margins and all the trajectory of what it takes to bring a group together. That's what's needed in our world to correct the imbalances that are there.
Mm.
You know, that's I kind of think about that as a biological leadership. You know, it's the thing that's going to say, no, we're not digging more coal out of the ground, and no, we're not going to eliminate this species, and no, this is what we stand for, because we're preserving life. And I've learned a lot of those bottom lines and the confidence to say those no's from my Indigenous sisters and brothers, because that's their voice reminding us of what we've forgotten.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes. Beautifully
Interest,
said.
interesting, Sharon. I listened to the podcast that you did with on Yes Please,
Aha.
and I was listening to it in the car, and it automatically moved to the next podcast where Alison Armstrong
Ah,
was
yes.
talking, and her work is beautiful in terms of women understanding men, but also women understanding just how necessary it is for us to be women and feminine in order to be able to nurture and have relationships that allow a man to step into his strength and power. It all comes from us, and that's a huge amount of responsibility, but we are that space that creates life for us, for the men in our life, for our children, for the people around us. If we can't or choose not to step into that space, then we limit everyone around us,
Well,
including
that's what's
ourselves.
missing. That's the thing that's missing. It's like you. Sometimes I use the analogy when I'm working with women about their role. One of the many roles that we do, because we do so many different things. But wherever a woman is in the house, the kids, the man, the animals will find her. They just kind of she's the magnet that draws them all in. And so her duty of care is to care for herself first, so she can be the best version of herself when those kids or partners or animals find her. She's got that responsibility to care for herself so that she's the best. Whereas for men, their energy goes out, and they want to impact their environment in a positive way and change things for the better and do this and do that. And it's very evident, when men are like, when you see them, for example, in grief, like when there's a loss of a baby, a woman will just want to gather and be with people who love and who will listen, whereas he'll want to go and do things in the garden or work extra hours at his job or whatever. So it's kind of like one of those secrets where we've been hoodwinked into thinking that men equals leadership and spearheading the way, and that whole patriarchal mythology, when really we are gifted. It's this portal to the womb again. Seeds drop into us from the greater with solutions and suggestions and the next thing. And some Native American tribes, if the elder women said, we can see a famine coming or a flood coming, no question, everybody uprooted and went. Their authority was just trusted. If we regain access to that level of knowing, womb knowing, which is so attuned to the earth and what she needs, then we can teach our men that. And then they're like, I see this in my own life with my partner. He's like, I say this is what needs to happen, not in every domain and not all the time, but just like this deeply needs to happen. He's just like, I'm on it. I'm on that action.
Yeah.
So there's a beauty in there's another Native American saying, and I draw on them all the time because there's so much wisdom there. The job of a man is to support the life bearer.
Yeah.
It's so simple, but just think how different our world would be if we as life bearers had the attunement to that portal to the greater, and the connection and the knowing of this needs to happen and that needs to happen, and then the men were in service of that. How different would it look?
Interestingly, that it speaks to their desire to
Yes.
provide, right? So
Yes.
men are so fabulously wonderful at providing what you need when you tell them what you need, and if they're capable in that moment of providing it. If it's something they can provide, they will give everything to that providing. And interestingly, over the last few years, as I've done my own, deep trauma healing, and as I've morphed into my and really been able to come back to my feminine, which I was in when I was birthing, but when I went back into corporate for a while, I really moved into a masculine energy, right? Because the mentors
Right.
around me were masculine instead of
Yes.
feminine,
Yes.
and I had to shift into that space. So coming back to the feminine has been a real journey, but as I have, my husband has stepped into a whole new space in our relationship,
Right.
and it has
Right.
been life changing for us. And but for him, he's actually more in touch with his masculine now than he was when I was masculine. That
Yes,
makes
yes,
sense. So he has
yes,
stepped into his power at the same time as I've stepped into mine. And it's a
yeah.
beautiful synergy. And it's not about, there's no competition. It's
No
about being
hierarchy.
synergistic. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
And
yeah.
me
It's a
softening
beautiful
into that.
dance.
Yeah.
Mm,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
It's beautiful. Well, we
yeah.
could talk for ages. Pippa, have you got any other questions
No,
for
this is such
Sharon?
an interesting conversation, isn't it? One thing I would love to just quickly discuss is the concept of feminine power and feminine spirituality and the
Mm,
feminine energy. Because what I've noticed, I don't know if you guys have, in we're living in such a patriarchal, masculine-driven society, and with equal opportunity and what's happened in the last 40 years with women rising to so much power as in being equal, we've stepped into the masculine, and a lot of women are negating the feminine. So a lot of, and now it's actually coming out that yes, there is a masculine and a feminine energy. So for women who do not know how to get into their feminine energy, what would that entail, Sharon?
mm. So, so for me, I focus on the female body because that's been my domain of study and fascination, and the nitty gritty, what happens in the cells and the tissues. So feminine can mean different things in different cultures depending on the culture. Like it's a very fluid and contested, and sometimes what's the word, can be used in derogatory ways. So I've tended to use female spirituality and female power as distinct from feminine, because
Mm-hmm.
feminine sometimes carries the stereotypical thing of just being like compliant and nice and all of those less than desirable qualities that we want in our women, like you were talking about before, Pippa. So I focus on the female body and the spirituality of the female body because it's clear to me what that is, and I know there's a whole diversity of understanding about gender and maleness and femaleness as well, but my expertise is in studying the biology and the spirituality of the biology of the female body. And I would say it's very concealed, and women don't recognize it until they do, because spirituality in our culture has typically tended to be something of the mind or not associated with matter and the material. And so what 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 I was exploring and what my participants in my study showed me was that women actually do recognize that there's a spirituality about their menstruation, and that they do recognize there's a spirituality about their birthing, because it changes them. They wake
Yeah,
up, they start to see and feel things differently. Well, that may include feminine qualities, but it can also include those wild, primal, mother bear, roaring lioness kind of qualities as well that aren't typically associated with femininity.
Mm.
So for me, it's really important that my focus has steered away from that because of the sometimes the stereotypical associations, because I can be soft. I love getting dressed in soft feminine clothes and having my curves accentuated and doing my hair and my nails. I love all of that stuff, which is to me is quite feminine. But I'm also like very aware of my mother bear energy and its desire to protect life, and that's fierce.
Mm.
It's not soft or compliant. It's like going to take a stand come hell or high water, and it'll rip your throat out if you try and transgress. So that that understanding of female spirituality, I didn't grow up with that. We don't generally grow up with that, so we have to go looking for it. But when we do, man, is it there and is it available to us? You know, like understanding that menstruation can be a spiritual practice, that's a game changer. And
It
knowing
is.
knowing that so one of the things that I was doing last year, Pippa, when I was living up near you, was writing my second book, which is looking at menarche and birth and menopause as spiritual rites of passage,
Yes.
because they absolutely are. And you know, when a young girl begins her journey as female in that first blood mystery with a spiritual rite of passage, something lights up and wakes up inside of her, so that when she reaches her second spiritual rite of passage at birth, she's ready. You know, and if she doesn't, and she comes to her second rite of passage in childbirth and has the good fortune or the wherewithal to find the resources to awaken her to that aspect of herself, then it becomes a spiritual rite of passage in giving birth. You know, it's very raw and embodied and fleshly and fluids and mess and all of those things. That is where the spirituality of the female body resides, in all of that physicality. It's not some abstract once removed thing. It's right there in the flesh and in the matter. That's why it's so important that anybody in that space, any caregivers, any guests, any person has an awareness that they're entering into sacred space, because it
Yeah.
absolutely is. And you know, the dichotomy, where I think you said it before, Philippa, that, or one of you said about medicine not understanding that, is because there was a deal struck with the Pope at the time, back in the day, with Descartes, that the philosopher Descartes, who's regarded as the founder of modern medicine, that if he was able to get cadavers to do his studies, he would leave matters of the spirit to the church. And he
Yes, I
said,
remember that.
okay, deal. And so those two disciplines have stayed separate ever
Yeah.
since. So
Yeah.
you won't find many obstetricians who are willing to speak about the spirituality, but if they're sensitive to it, they know that something bigger than themselves is going on in the space.
Well, I love it. The we've all witnessed births and we've witnessed the spirituality of it. And I often equate it to the um, going into another identity. Like with every culture, with all the ancient cultures, when you go into from a girl to a woman, or from a boy to a man, you go through some kind of a ritual. And that ritual often entails something really hard, a challenge.
Yes. Yes.
And
Yes.
that's in my, opinion, and it's been voiced by so many other people, and I know you guys would agree, is that the transition of labor just before you bear down, that is the actual, what do we say? It's hard, isn't
It's
it?
a,
It's
it's a
the
rite of
it's the
it's a rite of
initiation.
passage. It's a
It's that
rite of
initiation
passage.
into motherhood.
Hmm.
It's, it's
And that
actually
is really big. It's massively spiritual.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting you say that, because my dad tagged my sister and I in a post on Facebook just this morning, saying that we now had irrefutable proof that being kicked in the nuts was more painful than having a baby, because women go back for it more than once, and men don't. They don't ever say, a year or so later, oh, do that again, right? And my response was, well, yeah, and thankfully that beautiful hormone cocktail causes that amnesia, and so that's wonderful. We forget about how painful it was, or how hard it might have been. But doesn't it just speak to the strength of women that they are prepared to do hard things? that they're prepared to go back and do something because of the joy that it creates. And it's not just about that one event being, not, being hard. Yeah, it was hard, but it was worth it. And things that are worth it very rarely are easy, right? So,
Absolutely. It's awesome,
yeah.
isn't it? It's an awesome thing. Yeah.
Sharon, I'd
Love.
love you to tell our listeners how they can get in touch with you, how they can absorb more of your incredible, beautiful wisdom. So how do they find you, Sharon? We'll put it
Yes,
in the
they
show
can.
notes as well, but
Yeah, it's just my website is just my name, Maloney with an O.com. And a great way to follow up from this podcast is to just get a hold of a copy of my book. So it's available. It's available globally. You can get it on Booktopia or the Book Depository or Amazon, or you can contact me via my website and I can post you a copy. And I also have an online program that's available for anybody who wants to follow up with. I think there's 93 videos. It's mainly video content, but it's also meditations, downloadable meditations, and transmissions from me about my love of the female body. So if you want a bit more juice, that's what you can do. Yeah.
thank
Love
you
it. Love
so
it.
much. Pippa, I'm sure you would agree with me that Sharon is a beautiful, fabulous contribution to the birth and parenting space. And it's been such a privilege, Sharon, to have you with us. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
We
you're
look
so
forward to having you
welcome.
back again.
You're so welcome, Pippa. It's an honour to be here, and I'll be very happy to come and have another conversation.
Yay!
Yeah, it was a very interesting conversation. Awesome.
Thanks again. Bye
Thank
for now.
you.